Hi everybody, welcome to today's poetry vlog episode. Jane, what are we going to talk about today?
We are going to talk about poetry, class, labor, and Fanta plastic.
That's a good summary, actually. That's a metaphor for it in the best way, and also literal. And if you're like, what are you talking about now? You'll find out when you watch the episode, so that works out. Remember to find Jane at Jane Wong Writer. Thank you. JaneWongWriter.com and at Parade of Cats on Instagram. The poetry blog stuff is always at the poetryblog.vlog.com. You can find the podcast version of this there, Instagram, Twitter, and I want to thank the Mellon Foundation for providing the equipment for this season because that is some serious luck on my end and deep appreciation. You'll learn the call for comments at the end of today's episode because that's also for students watching what you have to take notes on. So, all right, I hope you all enjoy.
Yeah, thanks, Chelsea.
Welcome to the poetry vlog. Today we have Jane Wong with us, who you might remember from a podcast edition a little over a year ago by the time this goes live. Jane, will you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Chelsea.
Yeah.
Super excited to be here again. Yeah, my name is Jane. I am a poet. I guess that's obvious, but I also am a professor at Western, which is up in Bellingham. My second book, which is coming out a little ways away, is called How to Not Be Afraid of Everything. That's coming from out from Alice Jane's books. And as I've been kind of writing essays lately, I also really think about my upbringing in a Chinese restaurant. So I also like to call myself a restaurant baby.
Yeah.
And I just did an awesome event at the Wing Luke Museum.
I had some students go to that.
Yeah, I feel like I saw a lot of great young people there.
Yeah.
Who also grew up in restaurants, and it was fantastic. So
yeah,
it's a little bit about myself. I love to eat, hence the restaurant life.
Yeah.
And one day I wish I could be a food reviewer. I don't know. That's another dream.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for introducing yourself, and thank you for being here and wanting me to do this again.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to have you on camera, and I'm excited to have you read for us right off the bat. So, will you read for us first?
Yes, of course. Thank
Thanks.
you. So, I'll read from a couple of poems that are in the forthcoming book, and the first one is called Tenants. Tenants. Above my neighbor's feet, fussing from room to room, velvet hooves tendering my head. Was a fruitcake curdling? Would the mail make it there on time and must make it there on time? Below, I try to light the stove. Little clicks of the tongue heat and water my altar. Underground, my grandfather breathes through a silk jacket, a dandelion mane resting between his lips. Here, every living thing is an altar. Sweet worms kiss his knuckles to sleep. Loose doorknobs I open, story after story. My family a spiral staircase, the fish spine picked clean, the snail's miasmic song. 1982, sun gasping through splintering snow, a lemon slice folded in my mother's cup, a generous bulb, a lighthouse across oceans she cannot see. 1985, we slept in a split-level attic, squirrels running across the beams. 1964, my grandfather offers my mother one egg. Her brother looks on, fists full of ash. 1967, to make the body dance with sticks and stones to break alone. Within prison, rosefinch feathers float through bars, what he cannot talk about. My grandfather sings to me in a ladybug-speckled coffin, the color of good teeth. Above, my grandmother keeps heaps upon heaps of oil containers, poured and repurposed in hunched Fanta plastic. This living can be so quiet sometimes you can hear the lights humming. Moss slinks into my walls and is painted over white to mint. I touch the wall, these porous lives, these dense understories. Today, I cut a telescope in two to see everything inside out, new. And I'll just read a little bit from a section from a longer poem that runs throughout the second book called The Frontier. What simply ends in this country does not. Onward and so forth. Thus declared in the half-light of a mosquito's bites, we keep moving. Each mountain rinses the sky of its crimes. My father empties his pockets, stunned and stalled in Atlantic wreck. No business, no job, no 2-for-1 peaches. The frontier consoles me, this land of opportunity, leaden, stolen, all for a lump sum. I slump over the proving ground, credentials gilded, framed in hovering horseflies. Each day I translate documents and bills and government forms for my family. My grandfather sings his songbird to sleep. Jersey unsmogs itself in a dream. What creeps into these stars? A sun spool, a lullaby for unsung shores. My grandfather's brown mole on his right cheek, expansive as prairie. Slumped as a California raisin in tears. Proof, a signature here and there in flourishing perpetuity.
Thank you so much. I'm excited for the new book even more now, actually. Everyone on here already knows I'm totally biased towards like repurposing religious language and images.
Yeah.
So, and actually what struck me is that it felt like the tempo of the two poems, even though I had the privilege of seeing it in front of me, so maybe it informed it, but the way you read them, it's almost like even though they're in the same world together, they're also in these two different scenes from each other, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So like the first one, it felt like there was this sort of like drawn out tracing of like this time and then this time and then this time and then this time.
Yes.
Which maybe is informed by the fact that it's tenants, but I thought of in terms of like biblical narrations, the weird sort of like layering out of like in the year of this,
Right.
but then kind of retooled.
Right.
And then with Frontier, it felt much more like expanding outward from one space, you know, and it feels more of like a building up and an onslaught, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I really loved both of them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Why did you choose these two to read?
Yeah, I love what you said about the two poems as similar in those kind of ways of kind of going in and out, and also the layering effect that happens. I chose these two, and I think a lot of the poems in the second book, and even in the first two, engage with kind of larger questions about class and what it means to kind of grow up immigrant, or immigrant, you know, as an immigrant child of sorts, or children of immigrants. And I think that for me, especially in Tenets, there's like a sense of like the layers of the history and class that kind of flow through, especially in moments where my grandmother has, you know, you repurpose oil because why would you throw out anything? And having that in like a Fanta, like soda, like, you know, container. And the moments in which my father is like gambling and, you know, that he can't find a job and that he's, you know, ultimately our restaurant failed as a result of his gambling debt. And so I was thinking a lot about class. I was thinking a lot about class in relation to, you know, growing up, you know, in a very diverse community in Jersey, and what it means for especially people of color coming from, you know, poor working class families. And as I mentioned at the top of the, you know, the vlog, is that, you know, I'm also a professor, and so what does it mean for me to have upward mobility? So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to kind of like talk about today, or think through what is the relationship between poetry and class and labor, and the kind of layered histories that come underneath all of those kind of topics.
Yeah. So I see it more in the first poem for sure, like you just mentioned with the oil. And I think growing up in the Midwest, we were in an area where it was really common for South Asian communities to join in, and then families from the South, so you had this clash. But the similitude was class-based, and this sort of like desire for, but also repulsion by that kind of class mobility. And like what you did around like food or materials, or like something as simple as like Mother's Day brunch being at Big Boy, you know, whereas in like Seattle, which is pretty wealthy, people get Mother's Day brunch at like Flora or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the sort of anxieties around that. How do you explore that in that poem without making it what the poem's just about? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, because what I would fear is that if we tell like a student, write about your class background, that it can tend to be a little bit of a like didactic or like teacherly, like almost sanctimonious reverence of poverty, which is definitely not what's happening in this poem.
Right.
So how do you dive into that space without making it just about that one thing?
Right. That's such a great question. I think for me as a teacher, I actually taught a class called Poetry Class in Labor. I taught it first at UW Bothell and just taught it at Western. And we read this short story by Lois and Yamanaka. And in the short story that's from a larger book, I'm blanking out on the name of it for some reason, but it's about kind of like what it means to have like homemade, like sewn clothing. And what I asked my students to do, we actually made a quilt. I had students kind of write down kind of little memory. So one prompt I gave them was to write a memory of something they really wanted but couldn't have when they were growing up. Another memory of a time in which they did get something that they really desperately wanted. And I also, on another next card, they were asked to kind of write down something that their family like would say, like a quote, you know, like your grandmother would say, like this almost like aphorism of like, you know, when you go to like McDonald's, make sure you take all the like ketchup packets because they're free. You know, so it was really fun. So it wasn't as like so intense to say like, you know, what is class to you, or how do you define it, or when did you notice it when you were young? But starting with smaller details so that it's kind of almost like naturally part of your life, which it is, and also not, because sometimes it raises to the forefront when you're having financial difficulty and you have to pay the bills. And I think that's something we don't think and talk enough about, especially for first generation college students, which I am myself, and what that means for us to even be, writing poetry. It's such a risk in our family. Like I could have done anything else. And so, in the frontier, there are moments where it's like, each day I translate documents and bills, and this other kind of labor that I know children of immigrants understand the work of having to go to the hospital with someone to be the mediator. And sometimes that responsibility is quite heavy. You don't want to say the wrong thing or misunderstand. And so it's always something that's in my work for sure. Like I know that kind of like deeply, like even another line with my grandfather sings to me in a ladybug speckled coffin, the color of good teeth, and like how like rich people have good teeth, and like what does it mean to have bad teeth or no teeth, because that's all a part of it. So but it's natural, it kind of comes in as it does. And I absolutely love kind of feeling like I'm like this part of working class background in the arts is being seen, and I think that more and more that's becoming, I hope, something to kind of, I don't know, consider in media too. So the difference for me I hated Crazy Rich Asians. That's some shit. I'm sorry.
That was real intense. And like the lead actor they hired has actually had plastic surgery on his eyes to make him look less Asian. My sweetheart is Asian. Nobody not knows that, right? And we went to the movie theater and saw the ad for it, and just like there was no universe in which the picture wouldn't be ironic. You know what I mean? And it's just this like, anyway, you can talk about it more, I'm sure, but it was so bad, it was hilarious. And we thought for sure it was like a parody, like surely it was like making fun of that, right? And then it wasn't.
Right.
It was actually just like leaning into like basically a Gossip Girl version, and in a very like global multicultural wet dream.
It was problematic on multiple levels. I think that my one caveat, or I think about like, well, it was amazing to see an all Asian American cast, And, you know, it was incredible for, you know, Asian men in that movie to be handsome and sexy and, like, you know, the love interests.
Yeah.
That said, I mean, it's had such deep layers of, you know, classism and racism in terms of different ethnicities. It was a lot for me to kind of take in. And you know, to see this world as being kind of applauded, this kind of, you know, one of my favorite TV shows on Netflix, One Day at a Time, which follows you know, Cuban family, working class background, single mom, and I just love all the kind of nods to class in there. Like I just, you know, when she actually does this, Penelope, the main character of the show, does this thing where she really wants to take her family on vacation, and there's this scene like, you know, like of course we can, like, you know, use the, what do you call it, the, not the, what's called an honor bar, or like the,
I'm not sure.
It's like, you know, you pay so much money to just like get a can of Coke out of the, like the mini bar, that's what it is, or something like that.
Yeah, that's
it's
like I've never done.
Right, exactly. But she has this like sandbag that she's holding in her hand, because like what happens is you take a can of Coke, they immediately count it, like charge like $7 to your room. But it was an amazing scene where she had to like move really quickly, where she was like, you know, just gonna put the sandbag there, and so it didn't charge the room, and then I drank it. And so I was like, oh, I get it. And you know, for, you know, movies that make me uncomfortable, like Crazy Rich Asians, like shows like One Day at a Time, I think do that work that needs to be done. Granted, it was canceled, which is really frustrating, obviously. But I always think deeply about all of that, and again, specifically in terms of my first generation college students, I think there are a lot of hidden, you know, kind of struggles or labor that's not really, like, some professors just don't understand, because maybe their, you know, parents were professors before, and like what is
or they didn't have to work as students, like the UW was my first time really encountering that, where there seemed to be this total oblivion to the idea that students might be full-time employed and have like so much more going on besides school.
You know, so much more. When I was an undergrad at Bard College, I had 5 jobs. I distinctly remember like almost felt kind of like I was constantly moving through different shifts of my life. Like I was like one place, 1 minute class, another job, class, trying to like hang out with friends, but then failing because then I had to go to another job. And so, and I don't know what it's like to not work, you know? Even when I was growing up in a restaurant, like I had to work as a kid, you know, to help out the restaurant. And so, and as I mentioned, this is my first time, you know, having whatever, an adult job, and this upcoming summer will be the first summer, 3 months, where actually, for the first time in my life, I am not working. Like, actually not working during the summer. And I to be honest,
you're going to writing retreats, which is its own type of work.
Well, this is interesting. So I actually don't think...
Like, to me, it's like still kind of work. That's what my friends have started talking to me about. They're like, Chelsea, just because you're working on a manuscript doesn't mean you're not working.
This is interesting. It is, if thinking about kind of a capitalist system having to validate its worth as work. However, I do not think of it at all as work to me, on a personal level. It's something that's completely else. I don't know how to explain it. It is mine. It is something that of course, is made and takes a lot of labor. But it's a different type of labor that's
actually not doing it just to pay the bills.
Right. No. And it's. I think what's difficult, I think, for me as a professor is that, you know, my creative work is what's going to keep me there. So for me, it's very strange for me to say, you know, okay, here, I'll show you that my work is published, etc. Whereas in my own personal life as a poet, I don't think of myself as working. I think it's play. I'm playing. And I think that I know that has to exist in the world. We live in capitalism, so I think that that's part of it. However, I mean...
There's like so many other things you could do for more money, though.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, so I have a similar story with college, right? Like I took night classes and was just working. And I actually, if I could redo it, I think I would have, I have so much student loan debt now. I almost wonder if I should have just like accepted that I'm going to be in indentured servitude for it. Like it's not going to happen. But there was this like huge anxiety around debt in my family. Like huge, like debt was failure, you know? So it's like I have to pay for school and I have to save up and I have to have, like, it's just like constantly working. And I think that there is a point when you choose to work with poetry or you deal in poetry that you understand that there's so many other jobs that would pay you more and you just be doing it for money, that poetry is a choice that you do because there's a serious amount of pleasure in it. And it's not for the money. You know what I mean?
It's
like,
not for it, but you should get paid. Like, it's one of those things where it's kind of like, the central core of it, it's play and joy and resistance and, I don't know, survival. But that said, I definitely want to emphasize that, you know, that should be paid.
Yeah.
But even, I don't think of it though, I don't usually use the term work. I don't know why. I think there's something about it, as if when you think about work, we think about it being difficult or we don't want to do it. At least we think about the larger idea of what work is. So, but I mean, I think that, you know, I don't want to ever get to a point where I think of like, oh, I have to write a poem because whatever, my livelihood depends on it in terms of my, you know, adult job as a professor. And actually, hilariously, you know, a lot of my colleagues are like, oh, you're so prolific, you write so much, and you're publishing so much. I was like, that's not anything to do with my professional life, actually. That's to do with my own joy and survival. Like, if I don't write, I get kind of blue and sad. And like, kind of like, you know, how can I stand anything else? So, and in the classroom, so if I give prompts to my students, I'm writing with them. Like, I write. But if I give you something, I'm going to be writing it in class too and sharing it. So I think that lets them know that, and a reminder to me that this is for myself. This is not for really, I don't know.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
When you talk about labor for a whole course, right? Like what comes up the most with students especially?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I've noticed across when I taught that course twice is that we talk a lot about emotional labor in particular. So something that's not tangible whatsoever. And so have that be writing as kind of like a type of emotional work. Or, my students even say, like, you know, sometimes being, you know, a friend, a daughter, like that's labor. But it's emotional. It's something that can't be, you know, defined. Or for myself as a woman of color professor, like a lot of the work I do is emotional labor and support and mentorship that doesn't really, you know, I can't quantify it or give it shape in a way. And I think that a poem can be a type of labor that is of the heart, and that's actually something that is hard to, you know, work with in an institutional setting. And so I question that myself all the time. I do. And I think that I tell my students all the time, you don't need to go to school to be a poet. However, you might need to go to school for other reasons in terms of that helping you in the kind of, world after, in terms of, you know, a job. But for poetry, not really.
I agree. I completely agree. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
I really appreciated this. And everybody else, the call for comments today, and if you're students, your note-taking assignment is to write about your relationship between class and the ability to pursue the arts. You can comment below with your experience of that. You can take your notes in it, but I'd love to hear more. And as always, the secondary comment is thank you, Jane, for doing this, if you're all feeling generous to do that. Because I appreciate it, and I know other people do too. All right, that's it. Thanks again, Jane.
Thank you.
All right, bye, everybody.
Bye.